The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Welcome to the bonus show. A couple interesting stories for you today. There's an article about how Stephen Bannon, a former Trump propagandist, has been caught claiming that an activist-led advertising boycott of Breitbart decimated the company's revenues, that it took 90% of their ad revenue away. And this is very interesting because it was sort of unclear what the boycott efforts were doing to Breitbart. And hearing from Steve Bannon, if it's true that it had such a significant effect, tells us sort of a couple of different things. Number one, it tells us that these ad boycotts can be effective in removing advertising dollars from a media outlet. At the same time, even after losing 90%, Breitbart is apparently so well-funded independently that they were still able to continue operating. And I don't know exactly what level of staff reduction they had, but it wasn't anything so notable that it made significant headlines. So you also have to understand that for particularly well-funded outlets like Fox News, as we've talked about before, even if you can crush their ad revenue, it's not necessarily going to actually impact programming in the way that you might imagine such a boycott would. And then the other thing is, I've said before, I don't really advocate for boycotts as a sort of proactive means of activism. I sort of take a free market approach to boycotts, which is if you don't like what's happening on a particular program, then don't watch the program, and naturally the advertisers will go away. I think it's a completely legitimate means or tactic to contact advertisers and say, you should pull your funding, you should pull your advertising from this program. But I think that it starts to get messy if everyone just starts focusing on boycotting advertisers rather than boycotting the programs themselves, when boycotting the programs themselves will have a much more direct and long-lasting impact. And what I mean by that is if you can convince some brands for PR shame reasons to stop advertising on a particular show, if the show is still popular and the show still has an audience, other advertisers are going to come in, whereas advertisers aren't going to advertise on a show with no audience. So if people just stop watching programs, that is much more effective. The problem is when Laura Ingraham or Breitbart or Tucker Carlson or whoever say something that is disgusting, it's not really that disgusting to their audience. And that's why a lot of that effort on pushing for advertisers, I question the long-term effect of it. And again, Fox News has continued unabated despite all of these advertisers bailing on Tucker and now having like the telethon style as seen on TV products advertising. Breitbart has continued to go. So I sort of go back and forth in terms of my view on these ad boycotts, but I think it's great news that it was effective enough, the boycott Breitbart movement, that 90% of their ad revenue went away. That actually should be more of a warning to the media outlets than to the advertisers, that if you allow this, whatever it is that's offensive or disgusting or problematic content to persist, ad boycotts can actually significantly affect you in terms of ad dollars. If you're super well funded, maybe you don't care about that. But 90%, Steve Bannon allegedly admitting it, incredible number. I talked to you last week about this problem that is taking place in New York City in a heavily Orthodox Jewish section of Brooklyn, growing anti-Semitism related to a measles outbreak. And I pointed out that there are so many different groups that have enclaves of anti-vaccine sentiment, that there are evangelical Christian groups, that there are groups in Japan, there are kind of hipster lefty groups, and that it is no more an issue of Judaism anti-vaccine sentiment than it is of Christianity at large. But even despite that, there has been growing tension with the Orthodox Jewish community in Brooklyn, and Bill de Blasio now has gotten involved and is speaking out about it, and it continues to be a problem. And at the same time, I read an article in our local paper back in the original home of the David Pakman Show the Daily Hampshire Gazette, I believe it was, maybe it was the Springfield Republican, about how there is actually growing anti-vaccine sentiment in what is called the Pioneer Valley of Western Massachusetts. And it is so disheartening and disappointing to hear this, but it really isn't very surprising for people around the country who may not know about this area. The Pioneer Valley in Western Massachusetts is a very big college area, lots of colleges and universities. It is a very liberal area, and it is liberal in the way that often is connected not to focusing on socioeconomic policy and inequality and those types of issues, which I focus on the show. But it is liberal in the way that it is, for example, so skeptical of corporations that anti-vaccine sentiment grows. And I could give you other examples, but it is not at all disappointing to hear that that area is experiencing one of the biggest rises in anti-vaccine sentiment and a reduction in vaccination rates that I actually now am worried for a lot of my friends who have kids and, of course, are vaccinating, but are around a lot of people that are not. And I was having a conversation with someone the other day about playgroups and having to ask now in these areas, are your kids vaccinated? Because I don't want my kid playing with unvaccinated kids. And it's hitting close to home, so to speak. We've seen it, as I said, in evangelical Christian communities in Japan, in North Carolina, Oregon and Washington, New York City in the Hasidic community, and now the original home of the David Pakman Show in the Pioneer Valley around Northampton, Massachusetts, experiencing this exact same issue. And I'm going to be back there in a week or so, and I'm looking forward. I actually know a couple of pediatricians in the area. Hopefully I can get to ask them a little bit about it. I am in Las Vegas. A very, very long flight here yesterday. I guess so normally the flight from Boston to Las Vegas is anywhere from 5.5 to 6 hours and 15 minutes, depending on winds and takeoff direction. And before leaving Boston, the departure time wasn't changed, but the arrival time was. And we were told that the plane is weight restricted because of extra wind pushing in the wrong direction. If you're coming out west, the flight is going to take even longer. It was rerouted to account for the winds, and there was a limit to the amount of baggage that people boarding later on could bring on. I don't even know how long the flight ultimately took, but it was never ending, extraordinarily bumpy for like the first 40 minutes and 40 minutes in the middle and the last 40 minutes. Combined with just a lot of people now on planes doing the thing where they have headphones on, noise canceling sometimes, or the big earmuffs, so they don't realize that they can't hear themselves, and they're just screaming to their seatmates, screaming to the flight attendant. So it was not the best experience, and I forgot my earplugs. I am frequently bringing earplugs on flights these days to protect myself from everything that is going on in there, and forgot them, and just not the greatest flight. But I got a lot of work done by virtue of being significantly longer than 6 hours. And I did get a chance to talk to Sam Cedar last night. We caught up about what's going on with YouTube and the soft demonetization that people are experiencing. Talked to him about his Glenn Greenwald interview, which I didn't see when it was aired live. Or not live, but I guess on his live stream, because I was flying out, but I've since had a chance to check out a bunch of it. We talked about some of the behind the scenes of it and what is going on within the left on the issue of Russia. And that's where you might have heard a more conciliatory tone from me on today's regular show about, I actually don't think the left is that split on this issue. I think there's a good opportunity to actually find that on 90% of the Russia issue, we are basically in agreement, and the other 10% is partially semantics and, of course, partially some genuine disagreements. And part of it is just in hearing from Sam about the way the interview went and the stuff that was happening sort of before and after the interview and on social media. It is self-destructive at this point for the left to be engaged in this kind of infighting on this issue when we actually, I think, do agree on a lot of elements of it. And that's where, if you were surprised by my more conciliatory tone, it was sort of catalyzed by my conversation with Sam yesterday. So the conference gets going tonight and tomorrow, so I will have much more for you. Slightly shorter bonus show today, as I do have to get to a bunch of conference stuff, but tomorrow I will have plenty of time to catch you up on what's going on. There will be more media people here as well, and likely some very interesting conversations. That's it for today. More tomorrow.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.